Guys, I'm really delighted to welcome back to the podcast Ric Grenell. He was the acting director for national intelligence in President Trump's cabinet 2020. Before that, U.S. ambassador to Germany 2018 to 2020. Also special presidential envoy for Serbia and Kosovo peace negotiations. Ric, thanks for coming back on. Let's talk a little bit about how things are looking in the Ukraine. It's a little difficult to know what's happening on the ground because we have this fog of propaganda, including a kind of single narrative coming at us in the United States from the media. What's your take on how it's going? Are the Ukrainians successfully holding out, or is this a case where Putin is just overrunning the country?
First, Dinesh, thanks for having me. It's a real honor to be here. Look, I think that the Ukrainians are surprising Putin, they're surprising the Europeans, and they're surprising Senate Democrats. We have to remember that there's been a titanic shift in what's happening in Europe. You now have the Germans, think about that, the Germans in a post-Merkel world. The Germans have admitted that they really caused this. Their admittance is, we got to scramble to pay our 2% NATO bill, which we haven't been paying. And for God's sake, we've got to stop the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. There's not enough media attention on this shift. In a post-Merkel world, the socialists, Olaf Scholz, who was the Minister of Finance, came forward and really said, you know what, this is probably causing a war. Our dependence on Russia are racing towards Nord Stream 2 and an over-reliance on energy. What we do know is that the Germans are now really admitting that that is not just a pipeline of energy, it's really a pipeline of influence. And the European Parliament has been saying this for years. One mistake that I think the Biden administration and our dutiful media in Washington always make is they've really started to believe that Europe is Berlin, Paris, and Brussels. And Europe is much different. It's Budapest, it's Warsaw. It's a lot of different areas of influence now. And we should never make the mistake of just thinking that Berlin and Paris are running Europe. I mean, this is a huge moment in the shift in Germany, and it would not have happened if not for the rest of the pressure of Europe. It certainly didn't happen because of pressure from Joe Biden.
Let's back up for a second. I want you to assess the thesis that was advanced, initially several years ago by the realist political thinker John Mearsheimer, who said in effect that, look, the Ukraine is on the border of Russia, and that the West has sort of made the mistake of giving the Ukraine the illusion that they can be part of the West, they can be part of NATO, they can sort of poke the Soviet bear, and we're all going to be right behind them there to protect them. And then when the bear turns around and swats them, the Ukraine realizes that they're going to have to fight this largely by themselves. Yes, with support from the other countries, but the other countries aren't going to commit troops. Do you think, looking at it from that realist angle, Mearsheimer has a point?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, we see the slippery slope of neocons constantly forgetting that Ukraine is really a bridge. They somehow forget that, the EU hasn't let Ukraine in. NATO hasn't let Ukraine in, and there's a reason for that. And I think it's because of exactly this. There are a lot of pro-Russia voices. There are a lot of people sympathetic towards Russia and Putin in Ukraine, but there are a lot of people who want to fight for freedom. And it is a battle there. You have to be able to balance both sides. Ukraine has always been a bridge, and yet we have too many people in the United States who forget that a bridge means two sides. And what they've assumed is that we're just going to, roll them into a pro-capitalist Western-style democracy. And that's the same mistake that I would say that we've made in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places. Part of the America First idea is not just putting America first and bringing our troops home and not starting wars. But you have to remember that America First was also pushing our allies to stand up and do more. It's why we brought our troops home from Somalia, actually. We said to the Kenyans, hey, it's your neighborhood. Can't you do a little bit more? It's why we really pushed Germany to pay their fair share. It's why we started to bring our troops home from the Middle East in different places. And it's also why we tried and started the conversation to say we should bring our troops home from Kosovo. We have 600 plus troops in Kosovo. And this is an area of the Balkans that they can begin to police themselves. There's a theoretical part to America First that I think people didn't really grasp.
Let's push the logic of America First a little bit, because I'm assuming that if we're America First, we accept that the Chinese would be China first, the Indians would be India first, and Putin would be Russia first. And so what if Putin were to say, hey, listen, the Ukraine is kind of in my backyard, and if you've got all these Western powers prowling around the Ukraine, how would the United States feel if you had, for example, China, stationing troops, doing military exercises, talking about importing Canada and Mexico into some kind of Sino alliance? It would make us extremely nervous. So his point is, can't you see my point that a Russia first policy for me requires a Ukraine that is at least not actively hostile to Russian ambitions? I realize today if you say these things, people go, you're pro-Putin, and I think I'm not being pro-Putin. I'm just trying to look at it from the other angle.
Yeah, so I spent 8 years, I know you know this, I spent 8 years at the UN inside the Security Council watching all of these debates that went from realist to practical to, philosophical debates. And I've heard this argument quite a bit, because you are exactly right that every country is about themselves. And the only country that gets in trouble for putting themselves first is America. But Dinesh, I've been in thousands, maybe tens of thousands of diplomatic meetings, and I've never been in one where the other side doesn't ask the United States for something. And so we have to remember that this is diplomacy. You have to be able to defend your country and be able to put your country first. And then, here's the key, explain why your position is good for them. This is basic negotiations. What I would say to your very good question is that I am proud to push an America First agenda. And I think the State Department should train our U.S. diplomats to never, ever apologize about America First, because an America First agenda is good for our allies. And we should be able to explain that. When America stands for truth, justice, the American way, it means that democracy flourishes. It means the rule of law flourishes. It means human rights are respected. Russia First can't claim that. And we should be able to explain to our friends, allies, and others that America First is good for them, it's good for the world economy, and everybody will benefit. And we should never shy away from that.
Let's take a pause. When we come back, I'd like to talk some more about Ukraine with Ric Grenell.